A lifetime of hard work, children laughing in the kitchen, family photos on a restaurant wall, a legacy that lives on. It all comes from the power of a conversation, like the one Tommy Hall had with First Horizon Bank about taking over his father's Charleston-based restaurant business. Now the table is set for a whole new generation. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Tommy. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
There's a fine line between genius and insanity, and we're walking it. It's the Marketing Madhouse.
I'm Moira Vetter, your host for Marketing Madhouse. My guest today is Laura Trotter, the CMO of U.S. Information Solutions for Equifax. USIS is what everyone says. We're going to be talking about the critical role of content to strategic B2B marketing, an area of passion for us both. Before we get into the thick of content, tell us a little bit about your background in business. How did you get into marketing?
I am one of those weird birds that knew that I wanted to do marketing from a very early, not only say early age, but I knew when I was going into to college, to undergrad.
This is it.
Yeah. So with the exception of a short stint in sales, right when I graduated, because I couldn't find a job that paid well, right out of whenever I graduated, which was a long time ago, I've been, lucky to be involved in various roles in marketing, throughout my entire career.
Well, and hats off to you for the sales stint, because I think that I was also a salesperson very early in my career, and I think it adds a dimension of context and what's real on the front line, to marketing that a lot of people don't ever, understand because they haven't been in those shoes to try to sell something.
That's right. There is nothing like being a quota-carrying salesperson in terms of, when you're now on the marketing side, especially in B2B, marketing, in terms of having that empathy.
So I have a question. So you don't often hear people say, I knew what I wanted to do, right? A lot of times you hear that I had no idea and I started to do some things and then it revealed itself. But how did you know? What happened to you? What was the thing that you were like, this is interesting?
I was taking just general business in undergrad, and I had a professor who was teaching a class on consumer behavior. And I just really loved that class. And then he subsequently got me involved in a marketing scholars program when we did a project for HBO and a local retail women's clothing company that I can't remember the name of, but it was like we were studying the impact of music on consumer behavior, and I was like,
"No, that's interesting.
I love this.
Yeah,
this is great.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and for anybody listening that is in academia, don't underestimate the number of times you hear, "I had a professor that." Right? I'm involved with KSU's marketing board, and you really do see the impact that people have in academia. So let's jump over to our first subject, which is content. So, you often hear content is king or queen. We'll say queen here. But talk to me about how content features into B2B marketing.
I think it is arguably the most important element of B2B marketing. Unlike direct-to-consumer marketing where, the buyer's journey, if you will, is relatively pretty short. Right. Most of the time, a B2B buyer's journey takes months. And so you have to be serving up information at various stages of a buyer's journey to ultimately purchase your product. And so making sure and identifying that single topic that you can use as a thought leadership at the thought leadership level, but then also later, further into the funnel is absolutely critical.
I have this is off topic and we didn't prep on this, but I'm curious, to us, working on very long sales cycle, we know it's a long journey, but I find that people that are earlier in their career, they have been exposed in their education to you tell them about a Coke product and the person buys the Coke product, right? And it is a very short consideration cycle and a purchase. How do you educate your team on that long sales cycle and the importance of all those touches with that content?
I think it starts with making sure that you have good personas developed, knowing your customer and understanding their problems that they have and how your solutions can help address those problems. It really starts there, because once you understand the complexity of the problems and then you start factoring in the complexity of having to kind of onboard the solution and maybe the cost of the solution, you realize that it's not the same thing as going into your local grocery store and buying a Coca-Cola.
You know, and something interesting there when you're talking about the personas, that something that we often say is that we're putting market before marketing, right? Really want to understand the market and that consumer behavior, but back to the sales and the marketing thing, your marketing journey is different than their buying journey, right? And so often I think, sometimes people come in and they say, we want customers to know all these things about us, and therefore here is our content map, which has nothing to do with how people consider or understand or, prepare to engage around, what it is you do.
That's right.
So you talked about a single thought leadership topic. And I think thought leadership is something, clearly when you have a long sales cycle and you have a complex offering, and you're a company like Equifax, right? You are thought leaders. You're in the leader quadrant. Talk about that. What is thought leadership to you? How is it the same thing as content? Is it different than content? Is it a type of content? Like what is thought leadership to you?
Yeah. So first, I view thought leadership as different from content. Certainly content can be created from that thought leadership topic. But in my experience, it's really important that companies develop a perspective on an issue and be able to take that issue into multiple different dimensions. So for example, at Equifax, we're in a kind of an interesting macroeconomic climate right now. In fact, we were talking about it just a few minutes ago, right? And the fact that, we've got rising prices, we've still got a strong employment market. What's the Fed going to do with interest rates? These are topics that are very, we have a perspective on, we have solutions that customers can lean into and use to help them navigate the uncertainty. So making sure that you identify what that topic is the first step to making sure that you have a good content strategy and an overarching campaign.
I think that's excellent. And it also takes courage and confidence to have a perspective, right? And sometimes people don't want to have a perspective, right? They want to talk about issues but not take a perspective. And I do think that is also the difference between content, right?
Absolutely.
And thought leadership, right?
Absolutely.
There's the word leader is in thought leadership. Okay, well, we are going to be back in just a moment with Laura Trotter on the Marketing Madhouse.
This morning in North Carolina, wheels are spinning. Determination is winning. A passion is now a thriving business, and it shows no signs of slowing down. How? The power of a conversation, like the one Clint Spiegel had with First Horizon Bank about starting a bike wheel manufacturing facility in Asheville. Now it's not just talk, it's rubber meets road. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Clint. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
And we are back with the Marketing Madhouse and our guest today, Laura Trotter. So we were talking about thought leadership and, taking a perspective. And you were talking about being able to go different directions with something, and that could be for different audiences that are experiencing different realities, or it could be different situational, things that are happening. But talk a little bit, I think you have used a phrase with me a few times, reuse, refresh, recycle. So talk about that idea.
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't come up with that phrase. Somebody on my team came up with it, so kudos to them. Yes, I love that phrase. And I like what it connotes because, again, if you go back to that thought leadership, pillar, that perspective that you're trying to develop, if you can create one meaty piece of content. So at Equifax, for example, we started a podcast and a webinar called Market Pulse during the pandemic. And that is our thoroughbred in terms of the content that we generate. We do this 2 things every single month. And we take that content and we literally chunk it out. We create short form content, we create social, we create ebooks, we create all different sorts of little video snippets and whatnot. And we can use that in multiple different channels. And so that's what I like to think of, that reuse, refresh, and recycle.
This is going to sound totally old-fashioned or something from some archaic time, but and I received that Market Pulse, but it reminds me of we used to have newsletter publishing,
yes.
right? And the thing I will say, and these were printed newsletters that I actually mailed to people, but what was great about that was that you had to have the discipline to stop and have editorial discussions about topics, and you knew you had to establish a cadence to be credible, and so that there is some wonderful things that come with, we got to say something, we have to have the perspective, and so we can't overthink this or wait until next quarter. It really does make you keep having a perspective.
That's right,
which is really important. Talk for a minute about, and we've got some time, so I want to dig down into this. It sounds like, we came up with this thoroughbred Market Pulse and we have the things, but it's hard to, first of all, agree to what the thing will be. And when you have so many different assets and so many different types of content that I'm assuming different team members have to be involved in to create, how do you do that? How do you get everybody on the same page about what it is? So talk a little bit about, how did you decide on Market Pulse? Who decided on Market Pulse? And then I have some more questions about how you keep it going after you get it out of the gate the first time.
That's a great question. And my answer might be interesting, because I would say it was a little bit of strategy and a little bit of luck.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, Market Pulse, the podcast and the webinar came about during the pandemic. And candidly, we went there because we were really heavily invested in in-person events. And then, of course, when COVID hit, all of that shut down. And so we moved to virtual events, and we discovered that our audience really, really liked it. But as the world started opening back up, the attendance and the registration of Market Pulse started to dip. And so we thought, maybe it's going to die a natural death. And then again, we were, kind of brainstorming. We have a great number of subject matter experts at Equifax, all these risk advisors and whatnot. And we have a chat channel with them, and we go back and forth and talk about, what's happening and what bank was announcing what. And we were like, wow, this is something we think our customers would really be interested in.
Right, we're sharing all these amazing in-the-moment insights.
Yeah. And so we hosted a single Market Pulse webinar and podcast on the topic of recession readiness, is what we called it originally. And the impact was huge. I mean, we had great, engagement, lots of registration. And then we started asking our customers, what do you want to hear about? What do you want to talk about? And they gave us the feedback. And so it was a little bit of a combination of what we were hearing just in the larger market, but then also what our customers were telling us as well. And so combine the two, and
No, and I don't want to overtax the newsletter. It's the same discipline, but the thing that you brought up that was interesting was that whole asking the customers what they want to hear, again, because I do think often the universe presents opportunities for you to take a position or have a perspective, and it's a moment in time thing. But again, I think this is what makes the best marketers and the best salespeople are those that are innovating alongside their customers, that are constantly having that dialogue. What are you seeing? What are you doing? How's that impacting? And then you're constantly refining an always fresh, perspective that's based on that.
I want to make a comment on that because I think that's such important. I mean, not only is it important to listen to your customers, but to your point, it does require a lot of coordination and strategic discussions with your internal teams as well, too, because we have a campaign manager, and of course she can put together, like you mentioned, the content map and all that, but that requires the coordination across multiple teams. We also have an industry marketing team, and so what they're responsible for is taking that information that is developed, the content, if you will, that's developed more from a generic perspective, and then customizing that for the individual market that they represent. So they're taking that information around, how do you mitigate risk but still grow in an uncertain market, but looking at that through the lens of automotive industry or fintech.
Yeah.
So.
It's something that I see sometimes, that it goes back to that question about the difference between content marketing and thought leadership, and are they the same thing? And of course, I know I have a perspective on the answer to that question, but I agree with you. I think sometimes people get an infrastructure and a topical outline, and then they push down to more junior people and say, go, study what people are talking about, see which, terms rank high on SEO, and then write our content, right? Do our content. And they think that is thought leadership, right? It's creating content around things people talk about. That is not thought leadership. No. That is content.
That's right.
I mean, it's just, content that you think is going to be engaged with, right? Which is different than taking a position and a perspective and kind of drawing people to you around places that you have unique value, unique perspective. One of the things, so I've used the word discipline. You've talked a lot about, working with the team and sort of that coordination. And I know that you've got lots of different players and you're orchestrating. And one of the things that I see a lot is the reinventing the wheel. And I think you have talked about new week, new channel syndrome. So can we talk about that? Because, a big part of, in the agency business, a big part of justifying your existence is we're not here to just help you make more stuff, right? If the stuff you have is working, keep using it and use it more, right? Or if you need new stuff because the world is totally different, then stop using your old stuff and, But talk about this new week, new channel, because we see it all the time. People come in and it's, it's a new quarter. I need a new thing. So what do you see? How does that affect you, corporate side, in a company? What is new week, new channel syndrome?
Yeah, I liken it to ADHD in marketing. It's really interesting to me, the number of people that literally just want to move on to the next thing week after week. And by the way, not appreciating the fact that doing so actually lessens the impact of what you're going to have in the market. So I think it's not unusual when you're talking about the market and recession readiness and how you get, maybe you yourself are getting bored with this topic, but your customers are still really keen to understand. And by the way, if you think that you've reached everyone with your message, think again, because you likely have not. So, if you go back to, Marketing 101 and the reach versus frequency, that frequency thing matters. Yeah. So, making sure that you continuously hit on these topics in multiple different channels. And by the way, that you're not flipping on all the channels all at the same time and that you're mindful about that, I think is another really strategic decision.
I think that whole idea of I had a boss that used to talk about until you are completely sick to death of seeing something like, oh my God, I don't want to see that article again, or oh my God, that phrase that we used to talk about the thing, I'm so tired of it. Well, then maybe somebody might just now begin to be seeing it because from the inside, you've been talking about it internally. You've been reviewing content creative. You've been noodling on it. You've been doing edit rounds, and you have engaged with this thing for a long time before it ever launches in the world, but especially in the B2B space. And I see this with people who have moved from consumer environments and come into a B2B environment. They expect to launch something and that piece of content to be irrelevant in a day or an hour or a week, but it could take months and months for the idea to take hold, for you to engage the right people around it and to create an opportunity to have a discussion. So I think, that is another thing too, like giving the content the time it needs to do the work with people. Out of curiosity, is there Are there parts of your business that it's easier to do that with than others? Like, is there, you said ADHD in marketing.
Yeah.
Are there some parts of the business that are consistently changing, and others where you can work an idea longer, or no?
Yes and no. I mean, you have to be nimble. I mean, like even with this kind of overarching campaign and it's now called Focus on Forward, as you know. We still, meet on a regular basis and make sure, are we addressing everything that we need to address? Are we talking about the right thing? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to do more here, less? So I think it's about, you do need to be fresh, but I don't think things change that much where you need to completely veer off your thought leadership topic unless the market massively changes.
I do think too that in a market where I think people talk more about always on and evergreen campaigns, that's where let's just use the example of Focus on Forward. I think it's a very open idea. Like, you might have to keep having conversations about what is forward right now, but
that's right.
Not, oh my gosh, we got to throw that,
Yeah.
And I think that is something that is a challenge for people to really kind of say, isn't that a general term? Yes, by design it's general, because it's going to mean different things over the life of this campaign.
That's right.
When we were talking, in advance of doing this, and I think it's very interesting that you, again, had that sales background early on. And actually, I want to stop on that for a minute.
Yeah.
What did you sell?
I sold drugs in Florida.
Okay, so like
legal drugs.
Yes,
but I mean,
legal drugs.
yeah.
Right? So like pharma rep.
That's right. I was a pharmaceutical
riding around
sales
in your
rep.
car.
That's right. I was a pharmaceutical sales representative. Yeah.
And you had your little wheeling bag.
I had a wheeling
that
bag
you
and a
brought
trunk
in.
full of samples.
My dad was a pharmacist,
Yeah.
so I know all about the people showing up with the trunk. I sold enterprise software, and it really. It's just so interesting, to have been a salesperson before you're confronted with marketing, because in my case, it was our materials and our advertising, our brochures that were used kind of deeper in the sales cycle, closer to conversion, were terrible. They didn't do any of the things that I needed them to do as a salesperson. And so my first experience working with an agency was trying to get the materials that I needed to help me, overcome objections and close gaps in the sales process. And so I think my introduction to marketing is what you really hope for it to be, right?
Yeah.
It's to sort of facilitate that. But so I ask this because, one of the things that we had talked about was the difference between lead generation and demand generation. And so often companies will come into the fold with us, and depending on how sales forward the organization is or how customer or market centric the organization is, different people have more authority or are squeakier wheels and can really create the whole infrastructure that marketing is designed around. And so can you talk a little bit about lead gen, demand gen, and what are the differences between
I
those?
think there's a huge difference. So lead gen to me focuses on quantity, like a number. And demand gen is around quality. And so, anytime, and I just recently had a very senior sales leader come up to me and say, I need your team to do lead gen. And I looked at him and I said, because I can get you a list of names and phone numbers and email addresses, and that won't take 5 minutes. I could do that if that's what you want, but I don't think that's what you're saying. I think what you're telling me is that you want people that are raising their hands.
Interested.
That's right.
Yeah.
That are truly qualified and want. They've already been exposed to a little bit, and they're raising their hands and saying, "I'm interested in hearing more." That's different. That's demand generation, and I think that marketers sometimes get wrapped around the axle of, hey, I created 500 leads, or I delivered 500 leads to sales this week. So I would rather have 3 really good qualified leads that turn into opportunities than the 500 that end up, wasting everyone's time.
I find a lot of a lot of organizations don't understand the labels, right? I've seen lead gen teams that were called demand gen, right? And then it's a very clear quantity expectation or KPI. Also, we might do demand gen work for people, and all anybody wants to talk about is conversion metrics. And when they're talking about conversion, they mean convert to customer, not convert deeper into the funnel, or
Right.
How are you structured at Equifax in terms of that? Because I think that is also an evolution. If you go back 10 or 15 years, right, as a lot of technologies came on in marketing automation, all of a sudden everybody had either lead gen or demand gen team, but it was still very much about leads.
That's right.
So where are you right now?
We have a demand generation team,
Okay.
and we do. We're a data-driven company, so so we do track our leads. However, there is no goal associated with my team on how many leads that are created. We mainly want to make sure that the leads that are created, are they converting into opportunities, and are those opportunities converting into close won revenue? So that at the end of the day is what I care about.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing you mentioned, marketing automation tools. Marketing automation has been great, and it's a fantastic element of a company's MarTech stack. But ultimately, I think it's also given us a false understanding of what is really working in terms of driving demand, not driving lead gen, but driving demand. Because if you think about it, marketing automation tools can only capture information that occurs online. But think about the things that happen offline. Think about the person that that dialed into the podcast, or the webinar, or tuned into the podcast, or had a great conversation with your salesperson at an industry event. That doesn't get captured in a marketing automation tool.
I love that you bring that up, because this is something that we talk about a lot. When you talk about the agency space, a lot of people say, are you a digital agency? And, there's a digital core. And I think it's false is 90% of what we do in the digital sphere? Absolutely. Yeah. But let's not pretend that's where $3 million sales are made.
That's right.
Or whatever, right? $50,000. There is so much that happens that has to happen peer to peer, in the thought leadership, and then people being able to stop and absorb tools and calculators in ways that they can look at their own business and evaluate. That clearly happens offline. It's not something necessarily that you're doing. And I think that is so important. It's something important to us, in terms of the ideas, because I think people are so quick, especially like topically we're talking about content. People think that means you turn on an engine and you start pumping characters out through digital channels. But really what you want to do is understand where there is either lack of understanding, or there's some perspective alignment that if we had it, we could have some mutual value exchange. And then you want to surround people with that content, but that doesn't just mean pumping characters out digitally.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
We're going to come back in a minute, and I want to talk a little bit about measurement. I think we've talked about that with this quantity and quality. But I want to kind of go into measurement, and then we're going to have a little. We're going to let our hair down. We're going to go crazy a little since it's the Madhouse. We're going to go crazy for a minute. But I will be right back with my guest, Laura Trotter.
Tonight in Arkansas, there's a mother tucking in her daughter and turning off the light. A business owner is burning the midnight oil. An at-home dinner date is plating up possibility. And it's all happening under one roof. How? The power of a conversation, like the one John from Integrity Solutions had with First Horizon Bank about his vision for a sustainable mixed-use building. Now it's not just words, it's life. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/John. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
We are back with our guest, Laura Trotter, in the Marketing Madhouse. And I just want to close out the topic we were on, and then we're going to talk about something fun. But just for a second, measurement. So we talked about quantity and quality of leads. How do you measure I know it's a huge open-ended question, but is there a simple way to say I'm interested in X? I think you talked about quality of revenue.
Yeah. Well, so we measure we measured a variety of different ways, but I would say the biggest telltale sign of someone saying, "Hey, I'm interested," is inbound. It's like someone coming inbound via our website or via our phone or whatever, and saying, "Hey, I'd like to talk to a salesperson." That is a qualified lead.
Right. Because that's not only intent, but
that's right.
I'm doing something.
But getting someone like, and we do search engine marketing. We have some display ads on occasion, that kind of thing. But just because someone clicked on an ad, that does not mean that they're necessarily qualified, you know, for a salesperson to speak to. I want to get qualified people, hand raisers, over to sales.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important because I think there's a lot of lead stuffing, a lot of things you can do to generate false traffic and supposedly show that you're performing, and you don't want to do any of that. You want the real people that are interested to be able to step forward.
That's right.
Okay, so this is the Marketing Madhouse, and props to my my beloved Prince. Let's go crazy for a minute. Marketing is crazy. I have had a long career in marketing, and people ask for crazy things. You find yourself in insane situations. You know, sometimes you're very resource constrained. So, floor is yours. What is something really crazy that you have experienced? Tell us about.
So yes, marketing is crazy. I have lots of stories. In fact, one day I'm going to write that book.
Please
but
do.
I have a situation that was actually kind of on me. It was an embarrassing situation, but I learned a lot from it. So first, a little bit of context. I worked, this was over 20 years ago, and I was working for a big Fortune 500 company, and we hosted, planned, and executed a big bespoke conference. 5,000 industry, customers, prospects, press, analysts, the whole kit and caboodle. And it was an annual thing. And this particular year, it was right, SARS had hit, and we were pulling customers in from all over the world, and we weren't sure whether we were going to have the conference. But at the last minute, we said we're going to do it. We're going to go for it. And so we still had email back then, but there was still a lot of print.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we did for audience acquisition purposes is we had a literal printed, mailer.
Your mailer, come to the conference.
Yeah. And so we spent a lot of time developing the theme of the conference and the copy and all this kind of stuff. But we were under the gun from a timing perspective because of this whole SARS complication. And so we developed this beautiful mailer, and it was like an odd size, not a standard size.
Custom die cut, longer print.
Yeah. And it was sent, and by the way, reviewed and approved, including myself and everybody and their brother in the organization. And it went out, and unfortunately, I was going through a divorce at the time.
Okay.
And my ex-husband worked in the industry, and he received an invitation in the mail.
Did he enjoy calling you to tell you?
He
that
enjoyed very much calling me on my way home from work one day to ask me like, "Hey, what's the date of the conference?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What's the date of the conference?" And he was like, "Well, I got this this invitation in the mail, and it doesn't have a date on it." So we sent out thousands of really expensive printed, invitations to a conference that did not contain a date. And so, look, I think that the lesson that I learned, and it was on multiple things. Obviously, you could talk about slowing down and making sure and all this kind of stuff. But the biggest lesson that I learned in that particular process is that when I found out what I had done, I went to my boss, certain that I was going to be fired.
Right.
Certain.
Yep.
And I said, "Hey, I messed up.
Happened.
Here's what happened. I want to fix it. I have an idea. This is what I can do, whatever." And that person was so gracious and so understanding that I was like, wow, that's what leadership looks like. And also, of course, helped me think through the solution and whatnot. But it was a great learning lesson just about leadership and just, obviously I'll never forget a date on a printed piece ever again.
Yeah.
So.
Oh my.
Yeah.
And so it is crazy, when you do have so many people looking at things. Like you do have to have a buck stop somewhere because you can have 10 people look at something and miss something.
Absolutely.
It's also interesting. I had an experience early in my career that I did not dedupe a list. I requested that something be deduped, but they included rather than removing the duplicates. So I was instructed that I had not used English, remove the duplicates. I had used jargon, dedupe. And I thought that the mail house would understand that, but they did not. But we ended up mailing a campaign that offered a discount to people who had just purchased at a higher price.
Yeah.
So there was revenue. And the person that oversaw me said, "You have cost me more than any employee ever has. Tell me why I shouldn't fire you." And I justified why they shouldn't fire me, and they did not fire me. But it is very interesting, too. You learn a lot about the people around you, how they react to, things that you don't think you're going to live through in the moment.
I did think for a moment, like, maybe if I don't say anything, no one will notice. But I was like, no, that's not the right path. That's not the right path.
It's not going to work. Well, I appreciate the share because, I think people learn, people think anything that goes wrong, they think I'm the only one or, this is horrible or I'm not going to live through this or I'm going to get fired.
Right.
And so I appreciate the share because, it is unbelievable how many times these things happen. I'd like to close out today. One of the things, we talk a lot about specific disciplines and subject matter expertise. But at the end of the day, you got into marketing because you loved an aspect of it. And, I think for most of us who've been in this career for a long time, we are looking back now down the road and forward, and we're really appreciating companies that are masters at the big M marketing, right? Really strategic marketing. And so I want to talk for a second about a couple of aspects of a company. So, it is hard to do these three things well, to both brand in the market, have an excellent product marketing solution, marketing brand, to have an employer brand, so to really resonate internally, culturally, and then to do good in the world, right? Be a good corporate citizen in the community. And so just kind of, thinking about all the companies you're exposed to, and it could be, a neighborhood company, it could be, a huge company, a peer that you've read about over the years. I think we were talking earlier about Harvard Business Review. You could have read about them in Harvard Business Review. But, what company do you think, or a few companies do you think do a great job of checking most, if not all, of those boxes?
First of all, I love this question. And I can actually think of several companies that I personally admire, but the one that stands out, I think, the most for me is the company Dave's Killer Bread. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I have some on my counter at home.
I love the product. That's how I first became aware of it. It has all these like neat little seeds and crusty bits on the outside of the bread, and they sell it at Costco now, and so it's a pretty big company. But I fell in love with the product first. But then I, as a result of a previous company that I worked for, I discovered that the one of the founders of that company is a convicted criminal. And he started, or he and another person started a foundation called Dave's Killer Bread Foundation that focuses on second chance hiring. And so I learned that in the U.S., 1 out of every 4 people has a criminal background. And by the way,
wow.
That number shocks me. And
There's 4 people in this room, so I'm looking around. Okay.
And most of the convictions are drug related. They're not, so
not violent crime.
Yeah, exactly, not violent crime. And if you've ever applied for a job, sometimes the application will ask you, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Mm-hmm.
And that answer to that box speaks to that person's, ability to, provide for their family, provide for themselves, become a law-abiding citizen again.
Right.
There's a big correlation between people that have been in prison and recidivism.
Thank you. Yeah.
And the ability to, and whether getting a job, how important getting a job is after being in prison. And so they've really gone about educating companies around the importance of second chance employment, and to the degree where they have actually influenced laws being passed in certain states and cities and jurisdictions called ban the box. And that ban the box is that question on an application that says, have you ever been convicted of a criminal? So I just love that. I just love the fact that, he took a very personal experience, turned himself into this, great owner and founder of this company, and then turned that into, returning that gift back into thing. And to this day, they still hire,
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think 50% of their employees are ex-convicts.
That is amazing. I have heard. I wish I could think of the company. There's it's a hot dog company in Chicago that I saw on like morning news one morning, and it was a very similar story. I hadn't heard that about Ban the Box though. I think that's really interesting because a lot of the major employers, you kind of talked about. You become aware of something, sometimes it's product first, sometimes it's things like this, right? You become aware this way and then you learn about the product. But I think it's really interesting because they went from a mission focus to a true, how do we change the environment, right? Which I like to talk about is the difference. It is not activism, it's actionism, right? It is like I'm going to go make something happen, not just talk about an issue. So that is a fantastic example. I love it, and they have a good product.
That's right.
That's the one thing that goes without saying. I think there are a lot of companies that want to do good and have a good story, but if you don't have a good product,
that's right.
It's only going to take you so far, right?
That's right.
So you do kind of have to get mastery in all the areas. All right, I'm going to throw you a wild card to wrap up. Is there any advice you have for other CMOs out there? So you're newer at Equifax, I think, in the last year, a little over a year. What's your parting advice for aspiring CMOs?
Know your customer, know your product, and connect the two. And understand the magic between those two. That would be my first thing. Is like that's the most important thing. And I think the second thing, I was like, just trust your gut. If you're at the point in your career where you're being afforded the opportunity to lead and grow other individuals in marketing or whatever it is that you're doing, there's a reason why you're there. And so you've obviously done some good things, and you probably know what to do. So trust your gut. Believe in yourself.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And I also love the know your product, know your customer, because I do think for those that are going through an interview, they often think they're supposed to be talking about how much they know about marketing, where I think the real showcase is when you say, I understand this to be the case with what you're trying to do and who I understand your customer to be and what I know about customers like those. So I think that's a really interesting point about connecting that dot between the product and the customer. Excellent advice. A good time here. I really appreciate you coming on the show. So thank you, Laura Trotter. And please join us next time where we are going to talk about that fine line between genius and insanity and walk it here on the Marketing Madhouse.
This morning in North Carolina, wheels are spinning. Determination is winning. A passion is now a thriving business, and it shows no signs of slowing down. How? The power of a conversation. Like the one Clint Spiegel had with First Horizon Bank about starting a bike wheel manufacturing facility in Asheville. Now it's not just talk, it's rubber meets road. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Clint. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.